So what this is a hard decision. There is no question about that.
This is about using the political system to advantage the people we represent and those people in regional Australia.
15 years ago, the question of who would govern Australia hung on the decision of these two men. And in Rob Oakeshot's case, it famously took 17 minutes for him to say that he would support a minority Labor government.
When the gong is given at the end of these words, there's a job to do and a first job to do for a new Prime Minister and to some degree an opposition leader. And that is to bring Australia together.
But while many voters will remember the 17-day-long negotiations and Oakeshot's 17-minute statement, you might have forgotten some of the underlying drama. For example, the then opposition refused to submit the coalition's policies to Treasury and Finance for costing before polling day, claiming there had been foul play in the process.
Why would we submit ourselves to putting in costings when there's a cloud over the integrity of the process?
The position had to be reversed when a hung parliament meant the decision on who would form government would come down to three independents: Tony Windsor, Rob Oakeshott and Bob Katter. When the bureaucrats finally looked at the coalition's numbers, they contained an $11 billion hole. Fast forward to the 2013 election campaign.
No cuts to education, no cuts to health, no change to pensions, no change to the GST and no cuts to the ABC or SBS.
Pledges that were spectacularly abandoned in the 2014 budget. Fast forward again to the unofficial 2025 election campaign now underway. Any pet shop galah can tell you that the absolutely overwhelming issue for voters is the cost of living. But the election campaign is shaping up as a contest between a government promising specific cost of living help during the next term and an opposition which to date has had just one policy response: cutting the number of public servants.
Why would Labor add 36,000 public servants in Canberra when we can't afford to put groceries on the table in this country for many families at the moment?
There is, of course, the coalition's nuclear policy.
They look at our energy policy compared to Labor's. They judge that it's 44% cheaper than Labor's policy.
Albeit no time soon, and only if everything goes to plan. But so far, the only policy that Peter Dutton consistently puts forward when asked about easing cost of living pressures in the next parliamentary term is cutting the size of the public service.
If you're saving $24 billion plus over the forward estimates with the public servants, that's money that you can either use to pay off debt or you can use to put downward pressure on inflation.
There are big questions over where the coalition would impose the cuts and the savings it would generate. The Albanese government has consciously brought thousands of staff who were classified as contractors back onto the books and claimed significant budget savings from doing so. It has also significantly increased the number of bureaucrats in areas that had become notoriously undermanned, leading to gross failures in service delivery, areas like Veterans Affairs and the bureaucracy where Robodebt was installed.
We know that'll have impacts right around the country. It'll have impacts on anyone who wants to use Centrelink, anyone wants to get their payments sorted, anyone who's after compensation, for example, veterans.
But the latest development in the sketchy coalition plan to deal with inflation by cutting government spending emerged yesterday.
You'd run the ruler over all the spending yourselves, so we may not know until after the election where you'd cut.
We need to sit down and look through an ERC process, which would be the normal course of things. We'll do that in government.
That is, the opposition leader was suggesting the coalition may not outline any spending cuts until after the election. It would be like 2013, but without the false expectations. Such a bold move would be largely unprecedented in recent political history, but it comes with a large dose of culture wars attached to it.
Now, positions have been advertised that include those required for cultural diversity and inclusion advisor positions, change managers and internal communication specialists. But such positions, as I say, do nothing to improve the lives of everyday Australians.
And when we're spending money on developing a strategy for a First Nations approach to foreign policy, would that fall into the wasteful category?
Absolutely, and so does the position of First Nations ambassador. Again, I don't know why they come up with these divisive positions that are, racially identified.
It's a very different strategy to the one being employed by Labor.
These are all cost of living measures.
The Labor Party launched a new ad overnight which highlights the various cost of living measures it has already taken and which have been opposed by Peter Dutton. And there's going to be more.
Can we expect any further announcements specifically about the cost of living for young people before the next election?
Yes, you can.
It appears the Coalition's main cost of living approach taps into voter stress and anger over the cost of living increases they have seen over the past 2.5 years. As Parliament convenes for the first and potentially last time before the election, we face a campaign fought between an opposition talking generics and voter dissatisfaction and a government talking specifics, potentially aided in a couple of weeks by an interest rate cut.
You know, Mr Albanese needs to stop focusing on the negative and for once start focusing on delivering cost of living relief to the Australian people. Australians have had enough.
All right. Yeah, Peter Dutton has made a decision to have a series of very harsh cuts, but he won't tell you what they are until after the election, and that makes him a very, very big risk.
Two very different strategies, but based on current polling, an outcome we have seen before, a hung parliament in which both major parties may be on the hunt for crossbench support. Only this time around there are a lot more crossbenchers to win over, with lots more questions to answer.